The great hall at Corvanholt blazed with 200 candles, and not one of them was lit for her. Rena stood in the doorway in her traveling gown, still gray with the dust of 4 days' road, and watched a footman carry the last of the high table settings into place. Silver that caught the light like water, crystal ranked in careful rows, and at the head of it all, a single card in a stranger's hand, propped against a goblet where the Duke's wife was meant to sit. The steward found her before she could take a step. He was a narrow man named Halloran, with a voice pitched for corridors, not rooms. "This way," he said, and did not meet her eyes. He steered her past the high table, past the long table for the gentry, past the lesser table for the upper staff, down and down again to a plain bench at the back, near the screens where the kitchen heat came through in gusts. A wooden trencher, a tin cup, no card at all. "There is a mistake," Rena said quietly. "There is no mistake, madam." Halloran's mouth thinned. Her Grace the Dowager was most particular about the seating. Rena felt the eyes settle on her, then the scullions by the screens, the pages along the wall, the fine guests turning in their chairs to see the dusty woman being seated below the salt. A few of them smiled behind their hands. They already knew somehow exactly whose place this was, and exactly how little it was worth. She had imagined this arrival 100 times on the road north, in the swaying dark of the mail coach, in the cold inns where she counted her coins twice before she slept. She had not imagined warmth. Exactly. She was too old in disappointment for that. But she had allowed herself to picture a quiet room, a closed door, a single hour in which to be no one's business. Instead, here was the whole household arranged like a court, and here was she, set down at the foot of it like a parcel delivered to the wrong address. The bench was hard beneath her. A draft came off the screens each time a kitchen boy shouldered through with a laden tray, and with it the din of the scullery, the clash of copper, a cook bawling for more coals, the wet slap of dishcloths. It was a world she knew, in truth, better than the bright one at the top of the room. She had scrubbed her own floors this past year, and mended her own hems by tallow light, but she had not crossed a kingdom to sit in it. She had crossed a kingdom to reach the room beyond the far door, and every foot of distance the steward had walked. Her felt like a mile added to that journey. She sat. She folded her road-worn hands in her lap and held her spine straight, because the one thing no one in this hall could take from her was the way she carried it. She was the wife of Aldrich, 9th Duke of Corvanholt. She had the marriage lines folded against her heart, and she had been sent to eat with the potboys on the first night she ever set foot in her husband's house. The Duke did not come down for the first 2 courses. That was the whisper that reached Rena's bench in fragments, carried on the same kitchen heat as the smell of roasting fowl. His Grace was above stairs. His Grace kept to himself since the old Duke died. His Grace had married abroad, God alone knew why, and now the woman had arrived, and look at her, gray as a field mouse, no maid, no boxes but one, sitting where a laundress sits. The card kept her company from across the room. She could see it from where she sat, a small white rectangle at the head of the table, angled so the writing faced the empty chair. Halloran had placed it himself with a little flourish, and no one had touched it since. Guests glanced at it and glanced away. The upper servants gave it a wide berth, the way one steps around something that might bite. It was the only place setting in the hall with a name on it. Every other seat had been assigned by rank, by knowledge, by the housekeeper's memory. Only the head of the table required a card, because only the head of the table belonged to a person no one in this house had ever seen. A kitchen girl, no more. Then 12 slid onto the bench beside Rena with a jug of small beer. She was too frightened to pour. "You're not to look at it, madam," the child whispered. "At what?" "The card." The girl's eyes were huge. "Mistress Andre wrote it. She said, 'Whoever reads it aloud will wish they hadn't.'" She swallowed. "They say there's a cruelty in it, a word for the new Duchess that His Grace himself hasn't seen. The Dowager had it set out so he'd read it in front of everyone. so he'd know what the whole county already says of the woman he brought home. Rena looked at the small white card across 200 candles. She thought, so that is the shape of it, not a mistake, a stage. She had been sent to the low bench not by accident but by design, seated in disgrace, so that when her husband finally descended and read the name written for her, the shaming would be complete, public, and impossible to undo. She had come a very long way to be made small in one evening. Rena picked up her tin cup and found her hand perfectly steady. She had one advantage: the whole glittering hall did not suspect. She knew precisely what that card was likely to say, and she knew something about its author that not even the Duke did. Her name was not Rena Vale, the plain-faced bride from a country no one at Corvanholt could place on a map. Her name was Rena Ashcombe, and 11 months ago she had been the only daughter of Sir Talbot Ashcombe, physician, book collector, and quiet friend to half the learned men in the kingdom, until a fever took him in the space of a single week and left her fortune in the hands of a man she had trusted like an uncle. That man was Mr. Sab Andry. He had been her father's steward of accounts, the keeper of every ledger, the witness to every signature. And when Sir Talbot died, Sab Andry produced a second will, drawn up, he swore, in the last clear hour of the dying man's life, that dissolved Rena's inheritance into a trust he alone controlled. The house went to auction. The library, her father's life's work, was sold in crates to buyers she never saw. Rena was turned out with a traveling gown, 1 box, and a warning to hold her tongue if she valued her freedom. She had held it for almost a year, in cheap rooms, teaching Latin to merchants' sons for coppers. That year had taught her things her father's library never had. It had taught her how a woman of no protector is spoken to by landlords, and how quickly a good name becomes a rumor once there is no one left to defend it. She had sold her mother's ring in the 3rd month, and her father's watch in the 5th. She had learned to make a loaf last 4 days, and to sit very straight and very still in a magistrate's anteroom for a whole morning, only to be told, at noon, that there was nothing to be done, that the will was witnessed, that the witnesses were respectable men, and that a grieving girl's certainty was not a thing the law could weigh. She had gone to those respectable men once alone, and asked them to their faces whether they had truly watched her father sign away his only child. They had been very kind. That was the part she could not forgive, the kindness. The soft voices, the regretful eyes, the way one of them had pressed a coin into her hand at the door, as though grief were a species of begging. She had dropped the coin in the gutter outside and walked until her feet bled, and somewhere in that walking the weeping had stopped for good, and something harder had set in its place. She did not think of it as bitterness. She thought of it as a debt, entered in a ledger only she could read, waiting for the day the accounts came due. When the cataloger's letter reached her, forwarded twice, creased soft as cloth from handling, she had read it in a single breath and then sat for a long time with her hands flat on the table, not daring to hope, because hope had become the most expensive thing she owned. The plan that formed over the following weeks was not the plan of a sensible woman. She knew that. A sensible woman does not walk willingly into the house of her enemy's sister under a false name and a forged history. But a sensible woman, she had decided, was a thing she could no longer afford to be. Sense had cost her everything. Recklessness, at least, was hers to spend. And then a letter had come, from an old cataloger who had once worked beside her father, with a rumor folded inside it that changed everything. Before he died, Sir Talbot had lent the rarest volumes of his collection to a fellow scholar for safekeeping, the late Duke of Corvanholt, a man who trusted vaults over solicitors. Somewhere in the great locked library of Corvanholt, the cataloger believed, lay her father's private papers, and perhaps the true and original will that would burn Sab Andry to the ground. There was only one difficulty, and it was exquisite. Sab Andry's sister kept house at Corvanholt. Her name was Mistress Vessa Andry, and she had run the great estate for 2 dukes across 19 years. She was the housekeeper who had written the card. She was the one voice the dowager trusted, without question. And she was the sister of the man who had stolen Rena's entire life, installed by monstrous chance in the one house on earth that held the proof. So Rena had done a reckless, desperate, unforgivable thing. When the young Duke of Corvinholt let it be known, through a marriage broker, that he required a wife of quiet birth and no ambition, a wife in truth, to end the county's talk and satisfy a dying promise to his father, Rena Ashcombe had presented herself under her mother's maiden name, with references she had written in 3 different hands, and, let herself be chosen, married by proxy, sent for by carriage, delivered at last to the enemy's own gate. She had not come to Corvinholt to be a duchess. She had come for the library, for the will, for her father's stolen name and her own stolen future. The marriage was a key, nothing more, a way through a locked door that no maid's disguise could ever have opened. And now she sat at the servants' table, watching Vesa Andri's cruel little card glow white across the hall, and understood the full and terrible symmetry of where she had placed herself. She was under her enemy's roof, under her enemy's sister's authority, one flight of stairs from everything she needed, and one careless word from ruin. Above her, unheard, a door opened at the top of the great staircase, and a slow, heavy tread began to descend toward the hall. Aldrich, 9th Duke of Corvinholt, came down his own staircase like a man walking to a duty he despised. He was tall and built along hard lines, with dark hair going early to iron at the temples, and a face that had forgotten how to be anything but grave. Grief had done that. His father, 8 months in the ground, an estate bleeding tenants, and now a marriage arranged by letters to a woman he had never laid eyes on. A woman he had agreed to only because a dying man had asked it of him, and because the county's endless talk of the unwed duke, the cold duke, the last of his line, had become a noise he could no longer bear. The hall rose as he entered. 200 candles bent in the draught of his passing. Rena felt the whole room change temperature. The easy malice that had circled her all evening, the smiles behind hands, the glances, the low, delighted murmur of people watching a stranger be put in her place, drew in on itself and went quiet and careful, the way a room does when the one person who holds every rope in it walks through the door. These were people who lived by his moods. She watched them arrange their faces. She watched Halloran the steward find something urgent to attend to at the sideboard. She watched, at the edge of the hall by the kitchen screens, the still black figure of the housekeeper fold her hands and settle in to enjoy what she had built. For that was the thing Rena understood. Now sitting at the bottom of the room with her hands quiet in her lap, this was a performance and she was not its author. Someone had arranged every part of it, the card, the bench, the 2 courses of waiting, the whole household assembled to witness. Someone had wanted the Duke to descend into a hall, already primed, to find his new wife broken and small among the potboys, and to draw the obvious conclusion about the sort of woman he had been fool enough to marry sight unseen. It was a clever cruelty. It only had one flaw, and the flaw was that no one in the room had thought to ask what the woman on the low bench might do while the trap was closing. He did not look at the low benches. He never did. To Aldrich, the back of his own hall was a place where cutlery came from, and returned to. A machinery of people he could not have named if his life were weighed against it. He walked the length of the room to the high table, to the single chair that had stood empty through 2 courses, and to the small white card propped against his goblet. Rena watched him from the shadow of the screens and felt her heart go slow and cold and very clear. Read it, she thought. Go on. Read what your house has written for me. He did not sit. He stood at the head of his own table with the whole county watching, and he picked up the card, and the hall held its breath as one animal. Whatever he read there, he read it twice. Rena saw the exact moment it reached him. Nothing so vulgar as a flinch. Aldrich of Corvinholt did not flinch, but a stillness came over him that was worse than any outburst, the stillness of stone taking a crack it will not show, For 100 years his jaw set. His eyes lifted from the card and moved, slowly, along the ranked tables, high, then lesser, then lower, searching. She understood for a woman who was not there. Halloran, his voice was quiet and carried to every corner. Where is she? The steward had gone the color of tallow. Your Grace, the seating was arranged by... I did not ask who arranged it. Aldrich had not raised his voice by a hair. And somehow that was the most frightening thing Rena had ever heard. I asked where my wife is sitting. Silence. 100 faces turned at last toward the plain bench by the screens, toward the dusty gray woman with the tin cup, and the Duke's dark gaze followed the turning of those faces until it found her, and stopped. For the length of a breath, husband and wife looked at one another across the whole length of Corvinholt, meeting for the very first time. He did not smile. His face gave her nothing. But he came down off the dais, past the gentry, past the upper staff, down the way she had been walked down an hour before. Only now the whole current of the room ran with him instead of against him, and he stopped before her plain bench, and every soul in that hall understood that something had gone very wrong with the evening's careful cruelty. The Duke said, "You have been seated in error." Rena rose. She did it slowly, without hurry, without the flush of a woman rescued, because she was not a woman rescued, and she would not perform it. "I have been seated where the card sent me, Your Grace," she said. "One of us ought to read it aloud, so the mistake is understood by all." A muscle moved in Aldrich's cheek. He still held the card half crushed now in his fist, and she watched him decide, in front of 200 people, that he would not read it aloud. Whatever venom Vesa Andri had inked onto that scrap for the hall to enjoy, the Duke buried it in his closed hand, rather than let it live in the air. It was the first thing he ever did that she did not expect. "There is nothing on it worth the reading," he said. "Then I am glad to have saved everyone the trouble." Rena inclined her head, the exact degree owed by a wife to a husband, and not 1 degree more. "I have eaten, Your Grace. The kitchen sends up an excellent barley broth to the lower table. You should be proud of it." Somewhere along the gentry's table someone laughed, quickly strangled. Aldrich's eyes came back to her face and stayed there, and for the first time they held something other than grief or duty, curiosity. Sharp, unwilling, and awake. He had expected tears, or triumph, or the trembling gratitude of a nobody lifted suddenly by his notice. He had braced, coming down that hall, for a scene. What he had not braced for was a woman who met a public shaming with a level gaze and offered him barley broth, like a queen granting an audience. "You will come with me," he said. "Not a request." "Of course," said Rena. "I am your wife." "I am told. It is why I was sent for." She left the low bench and walked at his side the length of Corvinholt, past every table that had watched her, walked down it, and she did not hurry, and she did not look back. Only once as they passed the screens did her gaze cut sideways to the doorway to the kitchen stair, where a narrow figure in black stood watching with her hands folded and her face composed as a closed ledger. Mistress Vesa Andri, the housekeeper, the card's author, her enemy's sister, in the flesh. At last, the two women looked at each other for the space of a single step. Vesa's expression did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear. Not yet, but the first faint recognition of a housekeeper who has just watched a plan go sideways and does not yet know why. Rena gave her nothing. She let herself be led out of the blazing hall and into the cold corridor beyond, and she thought, "I have made an enemy notice me on the first night." That was careless. Behind her, up on the dais, Halloran the steward reached at last for the abandoned card the Duke had let fall to the floor, meaning to pocket the evidence before the dowager's cruelty could be traced. But a slippered foot came down on it first. The kitchen girl, 12 years old, jug still in her hands. She stood on that card with all her small weight and stared the steward down until he thought better of it and turned away. Then she bent and slid the crumpled thing into her apron, and told no one. He took her not to a parlor, but to a small library off the great hall, and Rena's heart nearly stopped in her chest because she knew from a cataloger's letter read 100 times that this was not the library. The great collection, the locked one, the one that held her father's crate, lay somewhere deeper in the house. This was only an antechamber of books, but it was a beginning, and she filed the knowledge away with the cold discipline that had kept her alive for a year. Aldrich shut the door. In the candlelight of the smaller room, he looked less like a monument and more like a tired man who had not chosen any of this. "I did not order that," he said abruptly. "The bench, the card. Whatever was done to you tonight was not by my hand." "I believe you," Rena said, and was mildly surprised to find it true. "You believe me," he studied her. "You are the only person under this roof who has believed anything I have said in 8 months. Why? Because a man who wished to shame his wife would have read the card aloud, 'Your Grace.' You put it in your fist instead." She held his gaze. "Cruelty likes an audience. You denied it one. That tells me more than any letter of reference." Something shifted in his face, the crack widening, though he would have died before naming it. He turned away to the cold hearth and set both hands on the mantel. "My mother arranged the seating," he said, "through Mistress Andre. They did not expect me to come down." A pause. "They wished me to arrive after you had already been broken by it, and to find you weeping among the pot boys, and to conclude I had married beneath even the low thing they take you for." His jaw tightened. "I know how this house works. I did not think it would work its cruelties on you before you had unpacked your 1 box. 1 box." He had noticed the 1 box. Rena kept her face still. "Why did you marry me?" she asked. "The truth, Your Grace. I have had a long journey to be honest on." He was quiet a moment. "Because my father asked it, dying. Because the county has made a ghost story of me, and a ghost with a wife is at least a married ghost." His mouth twisted. "And because I did not care who she was, so long as she asked nothing of me." The broker promised a woman of quiet birth and no ambition. He looked at her. "I am beginning to think I was misinformed on the second count." "You were told what you wished to hear," Rena said, "as was I." He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him turn the words over. "And what were you told?" he asked at last. "About me?" "That you were cold," she said. "That you had buried yourself alive with your father and meant to stay buried. That you wanted a wife the way a man wants a lock on a door, to keep the world out, not to let anyone in." She met his eyes. The broker was very frank. I think he meant it as reassurance. He believed it was what I wanted to hear too. Something moved at the corner of Aldrich's mouth. Not a smile, but the memory of where one used to live. "And was it?" "It was," she admitted. "When I agreed to this, I wanted a locked door as much as you did. I wanted a place to be quiet and unseen and left alone." She looked away into the low fire. "I find the arrangement is not going as either of us intended." "No," Aldrich said slowly. "It is not." And for the length of a breath, the two of them stood in the small warm room, 2 people who had each married to be left alone and had each, done on the very first night, been seen. She should have stopped there. She was tired, and the fire was warm, and for one dangerous moment, this cold, grieving man felt less like an obstacle and more like the only other honest person in a house of knives. But she had a will to find, and a name to reclaim, and softness was a luxury she had buried with her father. "Where shall I sleep, Your Grace?" she asked, and let the shutters fall behind her eyes. "I imagine Mistress Andre has an opinion." Aldrich's gaze lingered on her a moment too long. A man turning over a page he could not quite make out. "You will sleep in the Duchess's rooms," he said, "as is your right. And tomorrow you will meet my mother, who is a formidable woman, and does not yet know she has misjudged you." Faintly, almost the ghost of something crossed his face. I confess, I should like to be in the room when she learns it. He opened the door for her himself, a small thing. A wrong thing for a duke to do for a woman. The house took for a fraud, and did not seem to notice he had done it. Rena passed him into the corridor. And high above, on the servants' stair, a narrow shadow in black drew back into the dark, having heard enough to know that the new duchess was not weeping, was not broken, and was not, in any way the housekeeper could yet name, what she was meant to be. The Dowager Duchess of Corvanhold was 80 candles bright and cold as a chapel floor. She received Rena the next morning in a long solar hung with tapestries, seated very upright in a chair that had held 4 generations of her line. Her name was Lady Mareth, and she had the same dark eyes as her son, sharpened by 50 more years of using them. A tray of chocolate sat untouched between them. Vesa Andri stood at the dowager's shoulder, hands folded, a black column of quiet. "So," said Lady Mareth, "the bought bride. Sit." Rena sat. She did not reach for the chocolate. "You will forgive the plainness of my welcome," the dowager went on, in a voice made for delivering sentences. "My son has taken it into his head to marry a woman with no house, no kin anyone can name, and 1 box of belongings. I arranged your seating last night to spare us all a longer acquaintance. I confess it did not go as designed." "No," Rena agreed. "It did not. You are pert. I am tired, your grace." "Pertness is what is left when the courtesy runs out." Rena folded her road-worn hands. "You wished to see me weep at the low table, so your son would think me nothing. Instead, he came down and found me steady. That is not my doing. That is his." Vesa Andri's mouth pressed to a line. But the dowager did something unexpected. She laughed. One short, surprised note, like a coin dropped on stone. "Well," she said, "you have a spine, at least. My son married a book with no title, and it seems the book bites." She waved a thin hand, and Rena understood she had passed some private, brutal little test. "Vesa, leave us." The housekeeper did not move at once. "Your grace, I hardly think—" "You are not required to think, Vesa. You are required to leave." The old eyes did not lift. "You have run this house for 19 years on the fiction that you and I want the same things. Go and run it. I wish to speak with my son's wife alone." For one instant, one only, Rena saw the mask slip on the housekeeper's face. A flash of something possessive and afraid. The look of a woman watching a door she has always guarded swing open without her hand on it. Then it was gone, and Vesa Andri curtsied and withdrew, and the great solar door closed behind her. Lady Mareth waited until the footsteps died. Then she looked at Rena with an attention entirely different from before. No longer the grande dame surveying a purchase, but a shrewd old woman turning over a stone to see what lived beneath. "Now," she said quietly, "let us dispense with the barley broth business. I have buried a husband and a younger son, and I have spent a lifetime among liars, and I know the difference between a common woman pretending to dignity and a well-born woman pretending to be common." She leaned forward. "Your hands are cracked, but you hold your cup by the stem. You flinch at no fork. When Halloran spoke Latin grace last night, your lips moved before his did. Those are not the habits of a bought bride, my dear. Those are the habits of someone raised to a table far finer than the one she was sent to." Rena's blood went to ice. "You need not look so stricken," Lady Mareth said, almost kindly. "I have not shared my observation with anyone, least of all my son, though he is not the fool his grief makes him seem, and he will come to it himself before long. I have watched a great many young women pass through this house in 19 years, my dear. Companions, poor relations, the daughters of ambitious neighbors, all of them hoping to catch the eye of one duke or another. I know the whole species. They flatter. They arrange themselves prettily by the windows. They laugh a beat too soon at whatever a titled man says." Her eyes were very steady. "You have done none of it. You sat at my low table and were shamed before the county, and you neither wept nor schemed, nor flung yourself on my son's mercy. That is not the behavior of a woman who wants something from this house. It is the behavior of a woman who has already lost the thing she cared for and has come here about some colder business entirely. "Who are you?" said the dowager, "and what are you doing in my house?" For a long, ringing moment, Rena said nothing. The whole desperate architecture of her plan hung on this, on whether the sharpest person at Corvanholt would prove enemy, or something rarer. "I am your son's wife," she said at last, "lawfully married. That much is not a lie. But not the whole truth." "No? Does he know?" "He does not." The old woman sat back. Her ringed fingers drummed once on the arm of her chair. "My son," she said slowly, "has been a dead man walking since we put his father in the ground. He works. He grieves. He does not sleep. He agreed to this marriage the way a man agrees to a physic he expects to taste foul." She fixed Rena with her son's own dark eyes. "And last night, for the first time in 8 months, he was interested in something. I watched it happen across 200 candles. Whatever you are, girl, you woke something in him that his mother and his physician and this whole cold house could not." She reached out, unhurried, and took Rena's cracked hand in her own dry one. "I do not yet know if you are a danger to my son," Lady Meredith said. "You may well be, but I have decided I would rather have a dangerous woman with a spine under this roof than another year of watching him fade." Her grip tightened. "So, I will make you a bargain. I will not ask again what you are hiding, not today. But when the hour comes that you must choose between whatever brought you here and the man who is beginning to look at you like a living thing, you will remember that his mother saw it first. And you will not break him idly." Rena's throat closed. It was the first kindness, real, clear-eyed, unbought kindness that anyone had offered her in a year, and it was harder to bear than all of Vesa Andri's cruelty combined. "I did not come here to break anyone, Your Grace," she whispered. "I came to mend something that was broken long before I arrived. Justice, then, not vengeance." The old woman studied her. "There is a difference, child, and most people never learn it. Vengeance wants someone destroyed. Justice only wants the ledger set right." She released Rena's hand. "See that you know which one you serve. Now go, and send that possessive creature Vesa to me. I find I have a great many household questions for her this morning, and I intend to enjoy asking everyone." Rena rose, curtsied, and reached the door before the dowager spoke again. "The great library," Lady Meredith said to Rena's back. "The locked one, in the East Range. My late husband's pride." A pause, weighted like a key, sat gently on a table. "You have been in this house one night, and I saw you look toward it 3 times. Whatever you are hunting, girl, it is in there, is it not?" Rena did not turn around. She did not trust her face. "Good day, Your Grace," she said, and let herself out. For 9 days Rena played the wife. She learned the house the way a soldier learns ground before a battle. The stairs that creaked, the hour the watchfires were banked, the corridor where Halloran took his evening pipe, the precise minutes when the East Range stood empty. She dined at the high table now, at her husband's right hand, and endured the county's stares and the housekeeper's frozen courtesies. Vesa Andri never again ceded her wrong. Vesa Andri, since the dowager's household questions, moved through Corvanholt with the careful quiet of a woman whose ground has begun to shift beneath her, and who blames the new Duchess for every inch of it. And every night, Rena watched the great library and could not get in. It was kept locked. The only keys hung on Vesa's own ring and on a second ring in the Duke's study, and Aldrich worked in that study until the small hours nearly every night, buried in the ledgers of a bleeding estate. The one room in England that held her father's stolen life sat behind an oak door, 40 feet from where she slept, and she could no more reach it than reach the moon. The strange thing, the dangerous thing, was that the waiting had grown gentler than it had any right to be. Aldrich had taken to seeking her out, not warmly. He had no warmth to spare yet, but he would appear where she was, in the small library, in the walled garden, going brown with autumn, and stand, and say little, and seem easier for it. He told her in fragments about his brother dead these 2 years, about his father, about the tenants he could not save. She told him true things wrapped around the hollow where the lie lived, her father, her books, her grief. They were, she realized with something close to fear, becoming friends. And a friend was a far more dangerous thing to deceive than an enemy. Once in the garden he found a rare Aldine octavo she had left open on a bench and read the Greek of it aloud, haltingly, and looked up to find her mouthing the next line before he reached it. He said nothing, but his eyes changed, and she knew she had let a thread show. There were other such moments, small and dangerous, scattered through those 9 days like coins dropped in a dim room. She kept finding them by touch. He asked her once. Over the ledgers he could not make balance, whether she read figures as easily as she seemed to read everything else, and she had corrected his arithmetic before she remembered to be a maid about it. He had looked at her a long moment and said only, "Thank you," and made the correction, and neither of them had spoken of it again. Another evening she came upon him in the small library with his brother's miniature in his hand, and instead of retreating she had stayed and said nothing. And after a while he had begun to talk, not to her exactly, but into the quiet she made, about a boy who had climbed too high in the beech trees and laughed at every warning, and who had grown into a man the whole county loved, and who had died anyway of a fever in a foreign city, with none of them near. She had understood grief like that. She had let him have the silence he needed, and had gone away certain she was making the gravest mistake of a life already full of them. For the danger was not that she would be caught. The danger was that she was beginning to want to stay caught. She had come to Corvanhold with the whole of herself organized around a single point, the way iron filings arrange themselves toward a magnet, the library, the will, the debt. And now, without her leave, some of those filings had begun to swing toward the man instead. She would lie awake in the Duchess's great cold bed and take herself sternly to task. He was a means. The marriage was a key. She would find the will, reclaim her name, and go back to Devon, to the small recovered life that was rightfully hers. Far from this gray house and its grave-faced master, she recited it like a catechism. She believed it less each night. She saw Vesa Andrei watching her in those days, always at the edges, a black shape at the turn of a stair, a reflection in a dark window, a stillness behind a half-open door. The housekeeper never spoke to her beyond the barest orders, relayed now through a nervous underservant, but her attention was a physical weight, and it never lifted. Twice Rena returned to her rooms to find things minutely wrong. A drawer not quite as she had left it. Her one box shifted a hand's breadth on the shelf. She said nothing. She only grew more careful, and slept with the cataloger's letter sewn into the lining of her stays, and waited for the house to give her the one unguarded hour she needed. She did not yet understand that when the hour came, it would not be a gift. It would be a trap with the door left open on purpose. On the 10th night her chance came the way chances do badly and too soon. A rider came at dusk with word of a flooded weir on the far edge of the estate, and Aldrich rode out into the rain to see it and did not lock his study behind him. Rena waited until the house slept. Then she took a single candle, lifted the spare keyring from the study in fingers that would not quite stay steady, and went to the east range through corridors black as a closed book. The great lock turned with a groan that seemed to fill the whole sleeping house. Inside, oh, inside, 2 stories of shelving vanished up into the dark. The scent struck her like a blow, leather and dust and old paper, the very air of her father's lost study, of the collection that had been carried out of her life in crates. Her candle was a single frightened star in an ocean of dark. Somewhere in this room, the cataloger had sworn, in the section the old Duke kept for lent and borrowed treasures, lay her father's papers, and perhaps, perhaps the true will. She climbed the iron stair to the upper gallery, candle high, reading spines with a scholar's speed. Borrowed, kept in trust. Her father's hand had catalogued half these very shelves. She knew his method, knew he hid documents flat behind the tallest folios where no careless hand would reach. Her fingers flew along the leather close. She was so close her chest ached with it. A floorboard groaned on the stair below. Rena went utterly still. She pressed the candle flame out between wet fingertips and stood in absolute darkness, heart slamming, and listened. A footstep, then another. Slow, certain. Someone was in the library, climbing toward her in the dark, someone who had known exactly where to come. And then, from the black at the foot of the gallery stair, a voice she knew. "I wondered," said Vesa Andri softly, "how long it would take you to try the door." Rena did not move. In the dark, she was only a held breath and a hammering pulse. "You need not hide," Vesa went on climbing. A shuttered lantern cracked open in her hand, and yellow light climbed the shelves. "I have watched you look at this room for 10 days. A woman does not hunger after a locked library the way you do, unless she believes it holds something of hers." The housekeeper reached the gallery and stood, lantern raised, her narrow face all planes and shadow. "So, let us have it. What are you, and what did my brother's business have to do with a house you had never seen?" My brother's business. So she knew, or half knew. The ground opened under Rena's feet. "I don't know what you mean," Rena said. "Don't you?" Vesa's smile was a thin, cold thing. "Ashcombe, you thought I would not know the name. I write my brother's letters, girl. I have written them for 19 years. I know every soul Sab ever ruined, and I know the physician's daughter who vanished, and I know a bride with cracked hands and Latin on her tongue when I trip over one in my own East Range at midnight." She took a step. "You came for the will." "There is no will, you foolish creature. Whatever my brother did, he did cleanly. You will find nothing here but your own disgrace." And there it was. The confession, offered as a threat, spoken aloud by the one person who believed no one was listening but the two of them. Rena's mind moved very fast and very cold, the way it had learned to in magistrates' anterooms. Vesa had come alone. Vesa had not roused the house. A housekeeper who truly believed she had caught a common thief would have had the footman up, and the constable sent for, and the whole affair settled loudly by morning, to her own great credit. This silence, this private climb into the dark with a single shuttered lantern, this was not the conduct of a woman defending her master's property. It was the conduct of a woman protecting a secret. And a secret can only be protected from someone who might expose it. Every word Vesa spoke to frighten her, told her, underneath, that she was standing within arm's reach of the truth. So she did the one thing the housekeeper could not have braced for. She did not plead, and she did not run. She let the silence stretch and let Vesa hear her own breathing quicken in it. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and almost gentle, the voice of someone stating a fact rather than mounting a defense. "Then why," said Rena quietly, "are you so very frightened?" "Mistress Andri," the housekeeper's face contorted. "I am not. You are shaking the lantern." Rena stepped into the light now, done with hiding, her gaze steady on the older woman's. "You did not come up here to catch a thief. A thief you would have woken the house for. You came up alone in the dark, so that whatever passed between us would have no witness. Because if the proof were truly gone, you would have nothing to fear from me at all." She held the woman's eyes. "It is here. You know it is here. And you have been afraid of this room for 19 years. For one moment the two women stood locked in the lantern light, and the whole silent house seemed to lean in around them. Then Vesa Andri's control broke. "You will leave Corvinholt tonight," she hissed. Or I will go to the Duke at dawn and tell him his bride is a fraud who stole into his family's library to rob him. References forged, name false, married under a lie. Whom do you imagine he will believe? A woman he bought sight unseen. Or the housekeeper who has served his house since before he could walk. You have run this house for 19 years, Rena went on, unhurried, as though the threat had never been spoken. And in all that time you have never once let anyone forget it. You keep the keys on your own person. You read the letters before they leave and after they arrive. Nothing enters or leaves Corvinholt that does not pass beneath your hand. She let that settle. And yet there is one room in this house you have never truly mastered, one door your keys open, but you do not care to walk through. I have watched you these 10 days too, Mistress Andre. You send the maids to dust every corner of this house, every corner but this one. Why is that, I wonder? What is it in this room that a woman who fears nothing has spent 19 years refusing to look at? For the first time, the housekeeper had no answer ready. The lantern trembled in her grip, throwing the shelves into a slow, sickening sway, and in its light, Rena saw the truth cross the older woman's face like a shadow crossing a wall. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular terror of a person who has kept a thing buried so long that they have half convinced themselves it was never there, and who now hears a stranger describe the shape of its grave. He will believe, said a voice from the dark below. His wife. Both women froze. At the foot of the iron stair, rain still dark on the shoulders of his coat, stood Aldrich, 9th Duke of Corvinholt. He had come home to a house with an unlocked study and a missing key ring, and he had followed the only candle burning in Corvinholt to its source. How long he had stood in the black, beneath them, neither could say. But it had been long enough. Your Grace, Vessa began. Be silent. Aldrich climbed the stair without haste. In the lantern light his face was carved and unreadable, but his eyes, when they found Rena's, were not cold. They were searching, the look of a man reading, at last. The language he had known for 10 days, he could not quite speak. I heard enough from the corridor, he said. I heard my housekeeper name my wife a fraud. And I heard my wife accuse my housekeeper of guarding this room in fear for 19 years. He turned to Vessa. One of those things I can prove or disprove tonight. Give me your key ring. Your Grace, she has bewitched. The ring, Mistress Andre. The housekeeper's hand shook as she unhooked it. Aldrich took it and turned to the tall shelves Rena had been searching, and Rena understood with a jolt that he had watched where her hands had been. He was a methodical man. He had marked the exact span of shelving where a desperate woman had been reaching when the floorboard betrayed her. My father, Aldrich said, running his palm along the folios, kept treasures lent to him behind false shelving. I found such a cabinet as a boy and was scolded for prying. His fingers stopped, pressed. Somewhere in the wood, a catch gave with a small dry click. A section of shelving swung inward on hidden hinges, and behind it, furred with the dust of 2 years, sat a flat leather portfolio and a single thick volume bound in calf. Vessa Andre made a sound like a woman going underwater. Aldrich lifted the portfolio out. He did not open it. Instead, he turned, and with a courtesy that undid Rena more thoroughly than any cruelty could have, he held it out to her, across the dust and the lantern light. I think, he said quietly, these are not mine to open first. For a moment she could not make her hands take it. 2 years, she had carried the shape of this thing in her mind. The will she was sure existed, the proof she was sure had been made, the single document that stood between her father's true wishes and the lie that had buried them. She had imagined finding it so many times that the reality had a strange doubled quality, as though she were watching herself from a little distance. Then her fingers closed on the worn leather, and it was suddenly overwhelmingly real, and her whole carefully governed composure came apart at the seams. Rena's hands were shaking now. She took the portfolio and worked the tie, and there in her father's own beloved spidered hand, lay a sheaf of private letters, and beneath them a document heavy with a seal she had wept over at a graveside. A will. The will. Sole beneficiary, one daughter, Rena Ashcombe. And tucked into the calf-bound book, a letter in the same hand, addressed to the late Duke of Corvinholt. My old friend, I fear, my steward Andri, more than my fever. Should I not survive, see these delivered to my girl. She is all I have. The library was very quiet. Only the rain and the small ruin of Vesa Andri's breathing. It seems, said Aldrich, in a voice gone strange and low, that my house has been keeping a dead man's promise very badly. He looked at the housekeeper. Your brother is Sab, Andri. Your Grace, I did not. You knew this room. You feared this room. You would have driven my wife from my house tonight to keep what is in it buried. His voice never rose, and never had it been more terrible. You will not sleep under this roof again. But you will not run, either, Mistress Andri, because tomorrow, in the light, before witnesses, you and I and the Duchess of Corvinholt are going to open this portfolio a second time, and this time the whole house will hear what is written. Rena did not sleep. She sat by her fire with her father's will in her lap and let herself weep, for the first time in a year, not the grief she had swallowed at his graveside, but something cleaner, the tears of a debt about to be paid. The dead seal had left a small ring of pressed wax against her thumb, and she pressed it there again and again, as though it might sink into her and stay. She thought of the man downstairs. She had come to Corvinholt, braced against a cold duke in a scheming house, and she had found the cold duke to be a grieving one, and the scheming to belong to only two of them, and the man himself, the man had put a cruel card in his fist rather than read it, had opened a door for a woman he believed a fraud, had held out a dead scholar's papers and said, "These are not mine to open first." She had come to use him. She was no longer certain she could. That, she understood now, was the true danger she had walked into. Not discovery, but this. Near dawn, a small knock came. The kitchen girl stood in the corridor in her night shift, and in her two hands she held a crumpled white card, much folded, kept these 10 days against exactly this. "I couldn't read it, madam," she whispered, "but I knew it was wicked. I stood on it so Master Halloran couldn't hide it, and I kept it." She swallowed. Was I right? Rena took the card. By firelight she read at last, the thing Vesa Andri had written for 200 people to enjoy, a single line in the housekeeper's precise hand. "For the bought Duchess, a beggar in borrowed silk, who will be gone by spring. To Tixperceau." She knelt and folded the child into her arms. "You were right," she said. "You kept the whole truth of this house in your apron for 10 days, and you were braver than every grown soul in it. What is your name?" "Pell, madam." "Then, Pell, you will never scrub another floor at Corvinholt as long as I live in it. That I can promise you." The girl's face crumpled with a joy too large for it, and she fled before Rena could see her cry. Alone again, Rena smoothed the cruel little card flat on her knee and set it atop the will, and understood that between the two scraps of paper lay the whole shape of what was coming. One was a lie written to unmake her in front of the house. The other was the truth that would make her again. And by the Duke's own command, both would be read aloud in the same room, before the same witnesses, in a few short hours, the shaming and the vindication laid side by side for the whole of Corvinholt to weigh. She did not sleep after that. She sat and watched the gray come up over the parkland through the tall window, and she thought of her father and of the dowager's words. Vengeance wants someone destroyed. Justice only wants the ledger set right. She turned the two of them over and over in the dark, the wanting and the ought, and she was not yet certain when the sky went from black to iron to pale, which of the two she would choose when Vesa Andri was brought low before her. She thought of the man who had pressed a coin into her hand at the door and called it kindness. She thought of the magistrate's clerk who had not looked up from his papers. She thought of Sab Andri's soft, regretful voice telling her there was nothing to be done, that the will was witnessed, that she would do well to make no trouble. For 2 years the wanting had lived in her like a banked fire, the wish to see them all made small the way they had made her small, to stand over the ruin of them, and be at last the one who could afford to be kind about it. She had earned that wanting. She did not think she was wrong to feel it. But she thought, too, of the dowager's dry old voice. Vengeance wants someone destroyed. Justice only wants the ledger set right. And she found, turning it over in the gray hour before dawn, that she did not actually want Vesa Andri destroyed. She wanted her father's name restored. She wanted the crates of books back on their shelves. She wanted the lie undone in the eyes of the law and the world, so completely that it could never be told about her again. Those were not the same thing as ruin. And she saw with a clarity that felt like setting down a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it was there, that she could have the one without needing the other. The fire in her did not go out, but it banked itself lower and gave off for the first time in 2 years something more like warmth than heat. When the first bell rang below, she rose and washed her face and dressed with great care, not as a maid, not as a bought bride, but as Rena Ashcombe, who had crossed a kingdom under a false name and had, at long last, nothing left to hide. Then she went down to the great library to see the truth set right. They gathered in the great library at 9, in a hard, clean morning light that showed every mote of dust in the air. Aldrich had convened them himself. The Dowager Lady Meredith, in a chair brought expressly for her, upright and unreadable, Halloran the steward, gray and sweating, 2 footmen at the doors, and Vesa Andri, who had been kept the night in a locked upper room and now stood in the center of the floor in yesterday's black, her hands folded, her chin up. A woman determined to be broken with dignity if she must be broken at all. The portfolio lay on the great table. Beside it, at Rena's own quiet placing, lay a small, crumpled white card. Rena stood at the Duke's right hand, where a duchess stands. "Some of you," Aldrich began, and his quiet voice filled the 2-story room to its gallery, "helped to seat my wife at the servants' table on the night she arrived. Some of you laughed. All of you believed a story about her that this house was told. He let that settle. This morning you will hear the truth of who she is. You will hear it once and plainly, and then there will be no more stories in my house about the Duchess of Corvinholt." He nodded to Rena, and Rena, who had held her tongue for a year, spoke. She told it simply. Her father, Sir Talbot Ashcombe, the physician and scholar, his death of a week's fever, the second will that no honest man had ever seen produced, the auction, the crates, the year of cheap rooms and coppers. She named Sab Andri, steward of accounts, and watched the name land in the room like a stone in a pond. And she told them why she had come to Corvinholt under her mother's name, that her father had lent his rarest books to the old Duke for safekeeping, and that she had believed, and rightly, that the truth of her ruin lay locked in this very room. "I married your master under a false name," she said to the whole still house. "That was a lie. And I will not pretend it was anything else, but I told no lie about my birth, my learning, or my worth. Those were only assumed by people who found it easier to assume than to look." Her gaze moved, once, across the gathered faces. "I did not come here to be your duchess. I came for my father's name. I find I have been given both. Neither was a gift. Both were owed." She let her eyes move over them as she spoke. The footmen who had carried her trencher to the low bench, the undermaids who had smiled behind their hands, Halloran gray and sweating by the door. She did not spare them, and she did not accuse them. She only let them see her, plainly for the first time, Not the gray field mouse of the whispers, not the bought bride, not the sly thing Vessa's card had named, but a woman of learning and grief and iron who had walked into their midst and been weighed by every one of them, and found wanting on no evidence at all. "You decided what I was on the night I arrived," she said without heat, before I had spoken 10 words. "A dusty gown and a single box, and you wrote the whole of me from that. I do not blame you for it. It is how houses like this one have always worked, and how they will go on working. But I would ask you to remember, the next time a stranger is set down at your low table with the dust of a long road on her, that you cannot read a person's worth off the state of their hem. My father taught me that a book is not its binding. It seems it is a lesson this house had forgotten." Then Aldrich lifted the portfolio and opened it and read aloud. "The true will, sole beneficiary 1 daughter, Rena Ashcombe," and then the letter, the dying scholar's letter to his old friend. "I fear my steward Andre more than my fever. See these delivered to my girl. She is all I have." His voice did not falter, but at "she is all I have" something moved through the room, like a draft through a candle flame, and more than one servant looked at the floor. When he finished, there was a silence so complete that the fire's tick sounded like a clock. "And this," said Rena, and picked up the small white card. Vessa Andre flinched at last. "This is what Mistress Andre wrote for my husband to read at the high table on my first night," Rena said, "so that the whole county might enjoy it." And she read it aloud, in a clear and level voice, without heat. "For the bought duchess, a beggar in borrowed silk, who will be gone by spring." She set it down beside the will. "There is the lie. This house was told," she said quietly, "and there is the truth it was hiding. I will let them lie side by side, and you may all decide for yourselves which of them was the cruelty." It was the dowager who broke the silence. Lady Meredith rose from her chair slowly, a queen getting to her feet, and crossed the floor to stand before her son's wife, and in front of the entire household she took Rena's cracked hand in both of hers and pressed it hard. "I helped to seat you below the salt," the old woman said, and her voice for once was not made for delivering sentences. It shook. "I am 80 years in this family, and I have made few apologies and meant fewer. I make this one, and I mean it to the ground. You were owed a welcome, and I gave you a wound. Forgive an old woman who mistook a spine for insolence." "There is nothing to forgive that you have not already undone," Rena said low, "by being the first person in this house to look." A stir went through the gathered household then, small, involuntary, the sound of a room rearranging its opinion of a person all at once. The Dowager Duchess of Corvinholt did not apologize. Everyone under that roof knew it, as they knew the sun rose in the east, and she had just done it, publicly, to a woman she had helped to shame, and had bent her proud old neck to do it. Whatever story the servants' hall had been telling itself about the new Duchess, it could not survive that. A new story began to write itself in the room, in the silence, in the way the footmen straightened and the maids looked at Rena with something that was no longer pity, and not yet warmth, but was at least the beginning of respect. Then, and only then, did Aldrich turn to the housekeeper. "Vessa Andre." He did not raise his voice. He never had. "You wrote that card! You seated my wife in disgrace! You knew this room held the proof of her father's stolen will, because you have written your brother's letters for 19 years, and you kept your silence to protect him and yourself. Last night you would have thrown my wife out into the dark to keep it buried. Do you deny any part of it?" For a long moment the narrow woman said nothing. Then her chin, which had stayed so high, came down. "No," she said, "I do not deny it." Her voice was flat with ruin. "Sab told me the girl was dead, or near enough. A debtor's daughter with grand ideas best forgotten. I chose to believe him because it was easier than the alternative, and because this house was all I had and I feared any woman who might come and change it." She looked, briefly, at Rena, and something almost like wonder crossed her face. "I did not think she would be you. I did not think anyone would come." "They rarely do," said the dowager coldly. "That is what men like your brother count on." Aldrich let the silence stretch until it hurt. And Rena watched him choose, watched the anger in him banked and terrible look for its outlet, and she saw the moment his mother's words, or perhaps his own, turned him from the easy path. "I could give you to the magistrate," he said to Vesa. "Fraud, concealment, your brother's whole rotten business, and your part in it. It would be justice, and it would please a great many people in this room." Vesa Andri closed her eyes and waited for it. "But I find," Aldrich went on, "that my wife does not want to see anyone destroyed for its own sake, and I find I would rather be the kind of house that sets its ledger right than the kind that enjoys seeing justice done as a spectacle." His voice hardened. "So here is your justice, Mistress Andri. You will give evidence, full, written, witnessed, against your brother Sab Andri, in the recovery of everything he stole from Sir Talbot Ashcombe's estate, every crate, every coin. You will help my solicitors take him apart in law, so that what was done to my wife is undone in the eyes of the whole kingdom and cannot be done again. And when it is finished, you will leave Corvanholt for good, with your character and no more, to make what small honest life you can elsewhere." He paused. "It is a great deal more than you were prepared to leave her." Vesa Andri stared at him. Whatever she had braced for, it had not been a task that would gut her own brother, nor mercy with a blade in it. "I will do it," she said at last, barely a whisper. And then, to Rena, with the last of whatever she had, he said no one would come. "I want you to know that when it is written down, I mean to say that he was wrong." "Take her to write it," Aldrich said to the footman. And the housekeeper, who had run Corvanholt for 19 years, was led from the great library, not in chains, but emptied, which was its own kind of ending. When the doors closed, the household stood uncertain, waiting to be dismissed. Aldrich looked at them. "Her name," he said, "is Rena, Duchess of Corvanholt, daughter of Sir Talbot Ashcombe, who was a better scholar than any of us will meet again. You will not forget it a second time, a beat. You may go." They went, quietly, and many with a backward look at the woman who had come to them gray with road dust, and stood among them now with a dead man's will in her hand and her own name on the whole house's tongue. Spring came late to Corvanholt that year, and then, all at once, the parkland that had been iron and brown went green almost overnight, the walled garden filled with the racket of birds, and the great library, the locked one, the feared one, stood open now, day after day, its windows thrown wide to air 2 years of dust out of the shelves. It had become, without anyone quite deciding it, the heart of the house. Rena was its keeper. She had not left. That was the thing the county could not stop talking about all through the winter. That the bought bride had turned out to be a wrong gentlewoman with a fortune of her own coming back to her, a recovered estate in the West, a name cleared in law as Sab Andri's whole rotten edifice came down under his own sister's evidence, and that, being free at last to go anywhere. She had stayed. She had her father's books back, crate by crate, as the solicitors pried them loose from the men who had bought them, and she was putting them where they belonged, on Corvanholt's shelves beside the old Duke's own collection, so that the two scholars' libraries became one. The unwinding of Sab Andri had taken most of the winter, and Rena had insisted on knowing every turn of it. She had sat in on the meetings with the Duke's solicitors, a thing no duchess was expected to do, and no one at Corvanholt any longer dared forbid, and she had read every deposition with a scholar's eye for the false note. It was her own knowledge of her father's hand in the end that undid the second will. She could point to the very letters a forger had smoothed, the pen strokes her father had made 10,000 times, and this one had not. Sabandri, who had counted on a grieving girl's silence, had not counted on her coming back, with a duke's law at her shoulder and her father's own catalogues in her hand. He would spend what remained of his comfortable life explaining himself in rooms far less kind than the one he had cast her out of. Rosewood Cottage was hers again, the deed clean and clear in her own name, and the books came home a crate at a time, each one a small resurrection. She wept over none of them. She was done weeping, but she would sometimes stop unpacking, with a familiar volume open in her hands, and stand very still for a moment, and Aldrich, who had learned to read her better than he had ever learned Greek, would find some reason to be elsewhere until the moment had passed. She was on the rolling ladder, high against the upper gallery, when Aldrich came in. He came in often now. He had changed in the way slow men change, not all at once, but past mistaking. The iron was still at his temples, and the gravity still in him, but the deadness had gone out of his eyes, and once or twice a week now he smiled, a rare thing that she had learned to hoard. Pell, no longer a kitchen girl but the Duchess's own maid, and learning her letters in the evenings from the Duchess herself, followed him in with an armful of unbound folios, and set them down and slipped away with a grin she did not trouble to hide. "The last of the western crates," Aldrich said, looking up at her on the ladder. "Your father's Homer among them. It came this morning." Rena came down the ladder. He put out a hand to steady her on the last rung, as he always did now, and as always the warmth of it went through her, out of all proportion to the smallness of the thing. She had spent a year learning to expect no kindness, and she was still, months on, unlearning it, a touch at a time. "You needn't keep steadying me," she said. "I have come down that ladder 100 times." "I know," he said, and did not let go. They had never spoken of it, the thing that had grown between them through the long winter, in this room over these books, the shared silences, the arguments about Greek, the evenings she read aloud to him because he liked her voice on the old lines and would not say so. It had been built, like everything between them, of small things: a door held, a book left open, a chair drawn out. Neither had dared to name it because to name it was to risk it, and each of them had lost too much to be careless with the little they had found. "Rena," he said. He was not a man who used her name idly. Each time he did, it landed like a small formal declaration. "You are a free woman now. Your name is your own. Your father's estate is restored. Your fortune is coming back to you. There is nothing to keep you at Corvinholt." He drew a breath, and she saw that this cost him. This granite man, spending the last of his composure. "I have grown so used to your voice in this room that its absence has become the thing I fear most. I did not marry you, knowing you. I find I would like, very much, to stay married to you, knowing you. Not as a bargain struck by letters, not as a promise to a dying man." As he stopped, and for once the words would not come to the 9th Duke of Corvinholt. "As," said Rena softly, "as a man asking his wife," he said, "whether she might in time choose him, as he has already entirely chosen her." "When?" she asked, and her voice was not quite steady. "Did you choose?" He considered it with the seriousness he brought to everything. "I have been trying to fix the hour," he said, "and I cannot. It was not the night in the library, though I told myself a great many things that night. It was not when I learned who you were, though God knows that ought to have been enough." He paused. "I think it was the first night. The low bench. You looked up at me across the whole length of that hall, with the dust of the road still on you, and the whole county waiting to see you weep, and you offered me barley broth." The corner of his mouth moved. "I have been the master of this house since my father died, and no one in it has told me the truth to my face in all that time. And there you sat, at the very bottom of my table, telling it. I did not know what to do with you. I find I still do not. I have decided I no longer wish to learn." The library was very quiet. Sunlight lay in long bars across the floor where, on a black night in autumn, she had stood with a dying candle and a hammering heart, certain she had lost everything. "Aldrich," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name. And she watched it reach him the way his own use of hers always reached her. "I came into this house meaning to take one thing from it and leave. I meant to use you, and I am not proud of it, and I will not pretend otherwise even now." She stepped closer. "But somewhere between the servants' table and this ladder, I stopped counting the days until I could go. I have my name back. I have my father's books, and the strange, unlikely truth is that the thing I want most, of everything that was owed me, and everything that was returned, is the one thing no will could ever have given me, and that is, to stay," she said, "to choose it, to be, not the wife you were sent, but the one you would have chosen, had the world let you meet me first." She smiled, and it broke something open in his grave face. "I have been waiting, I think, for you to be sure. I am a slow man," Aldrich said, and there was a rough warmth in it now, and a methodical one. "But I have never in my life been so certain of anything." He lifted her cracked hand. The hand his mother had read the truth from, the hand that had turned a lock in the dark, and did not kiss it, because it was not his way, and she was learning to read the deeper things he did, instead of the easy ones. He simply held it, both of his around it, as though it were the rarest volume in the room. Somewhere below, the great door stood open on the green spring parkland, and the light came in, and the two scholars' libraries stood merged on the shelves around them. A dead father's life's work and a dead duke's pride, joined at last under the hands of the daughter one of them had loved, and the son the other had left behind. And in the doorway, unnoticed, the Dowager Lady Meredith stood a moment, with Pell at her side, and watched her son hold his wife's hand in the sunlight of the room that had nearly cost them both everything, and said nothing at all. She only smiled. The first true smile the girl beside her had ever seen on that formidable old face, and drew the child quietly away and left them to the light. The house that had been all silence and grief, when Rena Ashcombe first crossed its threshold in the dust of 4 days' road, was silent no longer, but it was not the silence of sorrow that had gone out of it. It was filled now, corner to corner, gallery to floor, with a quiet that had been fought for and honestly won, the quiet of two people who had each been robbed of a great deal, and had found in the most unlikely house in the kingdom the one thing that had to be chosen rather than given. Rena had come to Corvanholt for justice. She had not expected to be handed, in the same room, the whole of her heart.